everybody, my name is Tanya and this is my September wrap up. So from the 6th to the 13th of September I participated in Book Buddyathon, and the 5 books that I read during that week I've already wrapped up in my Book Buddyathon wrap up, which I will link down below, so I'm not going to talk about those books here. But there are 7 other books that I read during the month of September, not during Book Buddyathon, so let's get into them. So the first book I completed in the month of September was an audiobook, and that was The Call of the Wild by Jack London. So I think I have seen most of a movie based off this book a long time ago. So I knew the general kind of storyline, and I'm sure most people do know the general storyline of this one. But basically we're following the character of Buck, who is a dog, and so we're experiencing the story from inside Buck's head and experiencing what's happening along with him and hearing his thoughts on it. So of course the basic premise of this one is Buck, who is a half shepherd, half Saint Bernard hybrid I think, but quite a big dog, is kidnapped away from his home to be put to work as a sled dog, and is put to work tirelessly hauling loads backwards and forwards across dangerous snowfield country. And basically we just get the story of his struggles in dealing with his change in lifestyle and his conflicts with other dogs, and what ultimately happens to him as he starts hearing the call of the wild. I quite enjoyed this one. It was kind of a middle of the road read for me. I enjoyed it while reading it. It hasn't really stuck with me very strongly after finishing it, but all a really enjoyable read, and it's of course quite a big name, so I'm glad to have finally read it. Another highlight with this one is the audiobook was narrated by one of my favourite audiobook narrators, and that is John Lee, and I've listened to quite a few narrated by him now, and I think he's just fantastic. So if you're looking for new audiobook narrators, John Lee is somebody I would definitely check out. The next book I completed in the month of September was a buddy read, and that is Harriet by Elizabeth Jenkins. And I read this one with Alicia from Ex Libris, Vanessa from Chbosky, and Mercedes from Mercy's Cookies Musings, and this was fantastic. Harriet was first published in 1934, and it's the true story of a mentally disabled woman from the 1800s and the cruelty that she suffers at the hands of her husband. The blurbs for this one are a lot more explicit about what actually happens, and I knew that going in. I'm not going to go too much into it in case people do want to stay a little bit more in the dark about what this story contains, but basically this is the story of Harriet, who, as I said, is a mentally disabled young woman. She's considered a spinster. She was either late 20s or early 30s at the time of the novel. It's never explicitly stated what kind of disability Harriet has, but in either case she's extremely high functioning. She's incredibly interested in fashion and her appearance and loves owning nice objects, but in other respects is quite childlike in terms of her understanding and her ability to read or to write, and she's also incredibly wealthy. And this of course, as you'd imagine, leaves her quite vulnerable to being exploited, and she catches the eye of a young man with eyes on her money, and so it follows what happens to her after she's married. And again, I don't want to go so much into that, but it is just so heartbreaking and horrible. There are so many really despicable characters in this book, and then you stop and you realise that this is actually a true story. There are people who actually behaved in these ways. It's not just an invention on Elizabeth Jenkins' part. She's following very closely the actual events that took place, and there's just some really despicable people in this world. So I found this one to be completely engrossing and just so much more impactful knowing that this is the true story of this young woman's life, and I would highly recommend it. I've showed it before, but I don't even want to see the end papers look like this. The next book I completed was another audiobook, and that is Jesus the Son by Dennis Johnson. This is one that is part of the 30 before 30 list that I've been working on, so good to finally make some progress on that, and it was another quite short audiobook. This one's actually a collection of short stories, and that both worked and really didn't work in terms of the audiobook. So I wrote a little Goodreads review on this one, and in that I say basically I don't think I was very fair to this book. So I listened to it in quite a disjointed way. I had started it and then I stopped to listen to something else, and then I came back to it. Also, the fact that it's short stories in an audio version meant that there's very little time to digest each story before you're kind of thrown into the next one. And some of these stories you really do need to stop and to digest. So I think it's something that I would like to revisit at some point in book form, just so I can kind of read a story, stop and think about it, properly take it in, and then move on to the next one. Because there are some stories that I feel are almost seared into my mind, like really stuck out and were really powerful. And then there are other stories in this collection I can't remember at all and basically couldn't remember even straight after listening to them. Probably because I was still thinking about the previous story and the one that was seared into my mind. But I felt like I needed that breathing space that the audiobook just didn't provide. On the other hand, the narrator for this, which was Will Patton, was perfect, and he was the just perfect voice to be narrating these stories. So I had this real kind of up and down relationship with it, and just I found myself not knowing how to rate it, because some of it I would rate 5 stars, and then, as I said, other parts of it I can't even recall. So I settled on 3 stars, but it's something, with the proviso that I will go back someday and I will try it again, because I think it has a lot of merit. That's what this collection is actually about. It's a series of stories that are quite dark, quite gritty. They're kind of tales of addicts and alcoholics and different kind of really bleak little vignettes from their lives. Some of the stories that stuck out the most were the first story, which is Car Crash While Hitchhiking, which basically is the story of a hitchhiker who is picked up by a family and then there's a car crash. Another one, Emergency, is the story of 2 hospital staff, a nurse and an orderly, who regularly are high on their shifts and what that kind of leads to. And as I just want to go back and see what the stories that I don't remember were like, whether I don't remember them because I enjoyed the others better than those ones, or I just wasn't giving it for my full attention. So it's definitely one that I will be revisiting in the future. And the next book I completed was a big one, and that was House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. This is another one that I was buddy reading. Lindsay from Lindsay Ray read this as part of one of her Lindsay alongs, and I had previously purchased this for Nimi from Nimi M as part of BookTube Secret Santa last year, thinking that we could try and read it together and, kind of hold each other's hands through the scary parts. So we jumped in on that, and we also read this with Ayala, and I am still kind of working out what I think about this one. Which reminds me, I don't think I've gone back and put a rating on Goodreads. I was going to be thinking about it, and I don't think I've gone back and done that, which is the story of my Goodreads life. I always meant to write reviews. It very rarely happens. So I think Lindsay described this best when she did her weekly wrap-up, including this one, in describing this as an onion, in that onions, like ogres, have layers. And this book is definitely very layered. So in its heart, this is the story of a house that is bigger on the inside than the outside, and that kind of spooky tale of what's going on there. But that story is kind of overlaid with a couple more layers. So at its most outer layer, this is the story of Johnny Truant, who has discovered a book by a man named Zampano called House of Leaves, which is a whole bunch of material that's kind of scattered around, parts of a book and footnotes and extra material and stuff that is to do with the Neverson Record, which is a film that was based on the happenings of this house. And he's kind of going through and sifting through this material, trying to put it together and really getting drawn in by the story and really starting to affect his life. And so we're getting this outer layer of him and his life. Then we're getting this book that was written by Zampano and the elements of that, and then within that we've got the story of the house itself. I enjoyed some of the outer stuff, but at times I just wanted to get to that center layer. I just wanted to hear the story of the house, and I think that all the other stuff kind of detracted away from that. I enjoyed the concept of this more than the actual execution. So this book is crazy. You've probably seen it before, but we've got sections that are kind of just basic text, and then we've got different really weirdly laid out stuff. We've got sections like this, which have only got a couple of words on the page. We've got pages like this, where you've kind of got to jump around on the text. I love that unusual setup of it, the unusual layout, and how strange all of that is. But at the same time, I just wanted to forget all of that and just read this horror tale of a house that is bigger on the inside than the outside, and I think if that had been developed, that could have been amazing. The other thing I found interesting about this is everything I've heard about it says it is terrifying, and I didn't get that from this at all. There were parts that were mildly creepy, but in general, I didn't find this a scary story at all. And I think too, that's also to do with the fact that because of the layers and Johnny's story on top of it, and Johnny's footnotes that go on for pages and pages telling kind of what's happening in his life, really drew you back out of it, and any sense of tension that was developing in the actual main storyline is diffused by the thank you, Cleo. I think if it was just a straight story of the house, then it had the potential to be quite a creepy book, but because there was so much other things going on, because there was so much else going on, it really just diffused it down for me, and I didn't get that scariness from it. So all in all, I'm really pleased to have read this one. It was really good reading it as a group and hearing other people's thoughts about it. But I'm left a little bit confused about everything I've heard about it because it wasn't necessarily what I was expecting. And the next book I completed was another audiobook, and this was my BookTube Recommends book for the month, and that is Yes Please by Amy Poehler. And this was the one recommended to me by Pay from ASMR Books, and as usual I'm not going to go too much into it here, but I really enjoyed this one. I'm not all that familiar with Amy Poehler, like I've not seen Parks and Rec, I've not watched a lot of her movies, so I was going into this not really being an Amy Poehler fan in the first place. So I really enjoyed it, definitely related to a lot of the things she was saying, or can take a lot out of it, and I will hopefully film my video about this one soon. Then the next book I completed was my Agatha Christie for the month, and that was Sparkling Cyanide. So this was a first time read for me, and is one without one of her regular detectives, although Colonel Race does turn up in this one, so he is part of this, and Colonel Race has popped up in quite a number of books, both with other detectives and on his own in the past. As this story opens, we're following the reflections of 6 different characters who are looking back on Rosemary Barton, who seemingly committed suicide at a dinner party where all 6 characters were present, and we're watching their kind of reflections on her as a character and circumstances around that time. And as we go on, we find that all 6 of them have a motive for her murder. And so of course it turns out that she was actually murdered, and it's the investigation of which of them did it. And I found it really interesting actually reading from each of those different perspectives at the start, and kind of getting a fuller and fuller picture of the character that Rosemary was. I did have some thoughts on the solution of this one, definitely didn't grasp all of it, and I cycle around so many different people, but the person who done it was on my suspicion list at one point in time. They probably all were, but there were certain people that I thought, no, I don't think it will turn out to be this, so I didn't really get it, but Now, the last book I completed during the month was one of my Book Riot Orderly Box picks, and that was The Word Exchange by Elena Graydon, and this one was kind of a disappointment. So I mentioned in my TBR that I had been eyeing this one off when it was released, and I never quite got around to buying it, so I was really pleased to get it in the box and really excited to get to it, and it just didn't work for me. So this is set in a world where books are kind of a thing of the past, and all communication is happening on devices called memes. And we're following our main character of Anana, and she and her father work at the dictionary, which is kind of they're creating one final version of the dictionary in print, and on the eve basically of its launch, her father disappears, and it follows Anana trying to track down what's happened, and I don't think it made all that much sense. I just kind of find myself wondering at the end what the point of it all was, which is not necessarily the feeling you want to be left with when reading a book. So these are the physical books that I was able to complete in the month of September, as well as 3 audiobooks, and then of course the books that I read during Book Buddy-a-thon. If you've read any of these ones, please let me know down in the comments what you thought of them, because I'd really be interested. As I said, particularly House of Leaves, how you found that one. As always, thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!